Welcome everyone. In this session we're going to quickly look at finding analysis classes. Now what we need to note is that the analysis classes we can find is normally identified from our use case specification. And this is really a first pass in identifying classes for our specific use case. Now it also allows us to transition to the design later on and also to move to source code and executable code. Now, it really is a transitional step where we start to identify our first pass of classes. Now, stereotypes helps us to identify a new model element in terms of another model element. So that allows us to group some classes with common behavior, common theme, under a specific stereotype. Now, those stereotypes can be, for example, a boundary or a control or entity stereotype, where boundary is used to model interaction between the system and external actors, and the control models the use case behavior, and your entity models the persistence for a specific use case. Now, in order to identify boundary classes, we need to take into consideration the guidelines, which states that we will identify one boundary class per actor use case P. Now, there may also be several different types of boundary classes that we can identify. For example, for our user interfaces, for when we're interacting with a user, or a system interface class, or even a device interface class when we're interacting with another system or a device. Now, the naming conventions for boundary classes states that when it's a form, we add form to the end of the use case name. If it's a device or the system, we add interface to the end of the external systems or device's name. Now, what we need to note is that during this process, we also are not focusing on the user interface details or even the protocol that will be implemented. To identify control classes, we use the guideline which states that we identify one control class per use case realization or per use case. Now, this can be defined later on, and in general, we identify one control class really per use case. Now, this can also be expanded on when we're working in use case design. Now, the guideline for naming our control class state that we add the word controller to the end of the use case name. Now, an entity class represents stores of information in the system, which are usually persistent and is used to represent a key concept that the system manages. Now, they can be identified from the use cases, the business domain model, the architectural analysis abstraction, or even the glossary. We use a process called noun extraction to identify, firstly, nouns, and these nouns may later on become entity classes, attributes of a class, or they can even not have any significance in our use case or even the system. When using the noun extraction approach, we identify noun clauses or noun phrases in the use case documentation, and then for each noun we ask ourselves the following questions. Is this candidate inside our system boundary? If it's not, it may be an actor of our system. Then secondly, is this candidate an entity? By this saying, is it a person, a place, an object, an event, or a concept in the user environment about which an organization wishes to maintain data? Now, the last two questions really, to answer them, we need to review the class responsibility collaboration cards to see if there is a real reason for that noun to become a class. As an example to this, for the place order use case, we've identified the order, the item, the menu item, order processing system, and custom as candidate nouns. Now, the order processing system and custom are, what you will see, they are not inside the system boundary, and they also, for this, do not conform to the definition of an entity, because we don't want to maintain information about them inside our system. For the order, the item, the menu, and the menu item, they are candidates inside our system, and they conform to the definition of an entity. To answer the final questions, we use a responsibility-driven approach during which we identify responsibilities for a class or a candidate class. Now, this helps us to identify if a class have clear, crisp boundaries and to give the class clear definition of what the class is going to do and what it should know and with who it's going to collaborate. In order to do this, we add the class name or the candidate class name on the responsibility card, and then we list all the responsibilities on the left hand side, and then if we can find any other collaboration, then we list it under the collaborations. Now, responsibility can be anything which a class knows and will later on translate to attributes, or it can be anything which a class will be doing and will translate into operations. For example, to know the order number, the date, the total is knowing portions. And then to add an item or to remove an item from an order, those are doing actions. Now, for example, if we've identified the customer as a possible class, when we do the responsibilities for the customer, we will start to realize that it's very difficult to identify responsibilities as either attributes or operations for the customer. Sometimes it would happen that we just thumbsuck something so that we have some responsibilities for the customer. Please be careful when doing that, because then we're just trying to defend ourselves and it doesn't really justify that customer will actually become a class. Now, when you've created the class responsibility cards for all the candidates, where you've answered yes on the first two questions, you can now come back to answer the last final questions. Does this candidate have some identifiable behavior for a problem domain? Really translating to it, is there responsibilities during which this candidate is interacting and is required to do something? Now, the last question, does this candidate have some responsibility where it needs to collaborate with other candidates? Now, we've identified some of those also. Now, if you have that they are both yes and then you have all four as yes, then that will become a class. Now, guys, I hope this was helpful for you to identify classes. You can use this approach or these approaches to identify, firstly, the boundary, the control, and entity classes for a use case.